So now it's time to fill up the tank. You'll be surprised how long it takes to fill up a big aquarium like this one. In general, the higher the aquarium, the more light the aquarium will require. As an absolute minimum, we do suggest an 18-inch high tank that we have one row of fluorescent tubes. A 2-foot high tank will have 2 rows of fluorescent tubes. If you do wish to grow plants in the aquarium, we do suggest to double that amount of lighting, and if you do want to take the plants seriously, you might even want to consider metal halide lighting. Okay, now you've got your hood on your aquarium and you've finished your initial setup. You've got plenty of aeration, your filtration's going, you've got your heaters on and you're waiting for them to get up to 25 degrees on your thermometer. Next is to check the pH and make sure the pH is adequate for your fish. We tend to encourage at least a double dose of water ager to make sure there's no chlorine in the water. So your temperature's right, your pH is right, we've added plenty of water ager, add some salt. Tend to use about 1 teaspoon per 5 litres, and there's plenty of good brands available. Follow the recommendations, then you're ready to get your fish. It's really important you've got a good set of glass lids over the top of your aquarium, because even through the tiniest gaps, it's always your favourite fish that jumps out. Now when positioning rocks in your aquarium, what you're aiming to do is to try and minimise how much of the rock touches the gravel. So if you've got a large rock and it takes up that much room, all the detritus will build up around the outside and underneath the rock. Whereas what you want to aim to do is to try and put the rock on points so then there's a much smaller area touching the gravel. So you can use the glass or you can use other rocks to anchor each other off to try and elevate the rock as much as possible. Now, I typically will pick up a rock, place it in the water, roll it around in my hand and look for the most interesting feature of the rock and try to make sure that the most interesting feature is getting used best to its advantage. So you're trying to make as many caves, you're trying to create as much elevation, as many little holes where the fish can swim in and through. Try not to create contact with the surface as much as possible, and you should be able to decorate your aquarium beautifully. When selecting the gravel for your aquarium, you've got many choices. Things like the coral sand is only appropriate for fish that are going to have a very high pH, like the African cichlids. On the other hand, a 1 to 3 mil normal pebblecrete is generally what I'll recommend. There's brownish, reddish, blacks, whites. I do find that if you've got a pale coloured substrate, the colour of the fish will tend to be more pale as well. On a slightly darker substrate, the fish will bring out a more predominant pigment, stronger colour. I'll also find that if the substrate is too dark, that will promote the fish to become quite dark as well. So I'll generally like a reddy, brown type natural looking pebblecrete. Generally 1 to 3 millimetre is perfect for the rocks. If you have rocks that are 5 millimetres or above, you find that it harbours too much detritus, and what happens then is the detritus falls into the gravel as opposed to landing on the gravel. If the gravel is fine, as in 3 millimetres or 1 millimetre gravel, the detritus will land on it, where the fish can sift through it and pull any excess nutrients out of it. In this particular case, you can see that the sand is really dirty underneath. You can see that the fish are sort of tossing it around at the top, but you've got a lot of gunk filling up underneath. It would be really advisable to do a gravel clean on this gravel a bit more regularly to make sure that you don't get bad types of bacteria, anaerobic bacteria forming underneath this gravel. On all circumstances, I recommend that you keep your gravel as thin as possible, because when it does start getting thick like this, the amount of gunk that's building up in it does lower your water quality and does encourage the growth of anaerobic bacteria which discharge hydrogen sulfide which is a toxic acid into the aquarium and is actually capable of killing your fish. The only time you'd have a thick bed of gravel is if you wanted to grow plants, because they'll need that for their roots. So when you do a gravel clean, don't clean around the very base of the plant, otherwise you're going to damage the roots of the plant. In a cichlid aquarium, keep your gravel as thin as possible, because cichlids don't really work with plants anyway, because the pH is too high, so therefore a thin bed of gravel is very important. Another very popular decoration for a tropical aquarium is driftwood. Driftwood looks very natural and can enhance many aquariums. The only disadvantage of the driftwood is it actually releases tannic acids, which will often cause a tea colour to the aquarium, which can look quite undesirable. The easiest way to remove these tannins is using activated carbon. Place the activated carbon into the filter, and providing you've got enough carbon, it'll suck these tannins out of the water. Also be aware that what the driftwood is releasing is actually tannic acids, so it will soften the water, so therefore lowering the pH. So anytime you're using driftwood in the water and you want the pH to be neutral or alkaline, you may need to buff the water to compensate for the tannic acids which are produced by the driftwood. There's really two common approaches for keeping plants in the aquarium. One is buy a variety of different plants and find out which ones suit your aquarium, or you can set your aquarium up for the requirements of various plants. Now remember that no aquarium is really going to suit all different types of plants. Just the same as if you get a pot plant and you put it in your backyard, maybe that pot plant will thrive in your backyard, whereas it won't work in your friend's backyard, where the conditions seem to be quite similar, but in one area it will work and in one area it just won't work. So trying a variety of different types of plants and seeing which ones suit your tank is really the easiest. On the other hand, having basic understanding of what plants require usually mean that you'll be able to keep a wider range of plants, like understanding that light tubes age. Generally 6 to 9 months of a light tube, and you usually want to replace it because the gases in the light tube actually burn out and lose intensity and spectrum. So if you don't have adequate intensity and spectrum, some plants simply won't grow. Then also understand gravel fertilization. So what you'll normally do is put fertilization through the gravel, because in the wild there's a higher nutrient level in the gravel as opposed to in the water. So then the nutrients will passively diffuse up through the roots into the leaves. So putting fertilization through the gravel will definitely help your plants and increase the amount of iron in the water. Some plants respond better to some fertilizers compared to others. So it really is a case of trial and error, because different plants do respond better to different amounts of fertilization, amounts of light, and amounts of CO2 in the water. So if you have an aquarium with a lot of aeration, with not many fish, and a lot of plants, you might find your plants tend to suffer because there's not enough carbon dioxide in the water. On the other hand, if you have lots of fish and lots of plants, that probably won't so much be the case. And then on the extreme, if you have heaps of light over the aquarium and your demand for CO2 is very high, you can even think of using things like CO2 injection units, which will actually put CO2 into the water. So what I'm really saying is experiment with lighting, carbon dioxide and fertilizer to see what results you get out of the plants that you wish to keep in the aquarium. One really simple little key if you want to keep plants: don't keep fish that eat plants. There's so many varieties of fish that will actually eat the plants, and be wary of any snails which are going to eat the plants as well, because you could have a beautifully well run planted aquarium, drop something like a silver dollar in it, and then he'll go around and mow up the plants quicker than you can believe. So when you've got a planted aquarium, you really want to watch the fish that you go in. Ask before you buy them, does this fish eat plants? Because if it eats plants, the effects could be quite disastrous. Also be aware that a lot of the plants which are commercially available are actually not true aquatic plants. So therefore you take them home and they don't live for a relatively long period of time. If you want to have success with your aquarium, it is important you do get true aquatic plants, so then they have hope from the start. Also, the more plants you have in the aquarium, in general the easier the plants will be to actually keep, because the more competition, the the plants will be against algae, because the nutrients, the photosynthetic nutrients which are available in the aquarium, will be absorbed by the plants instead of being available for the algae. For gas exchange in an aquarium, you've got two options. One is vertical gas exchange, meaning that you're using an air stone and putting bubbles into the aquarium. So therefore the bubbles come up and the bubbles pop at the surface, which allows gas exchange, so the gas to exchange from the water to the atmosphere. Or you've got horizontal gas exchange, which means you've got a pump in the aquarium and the pump is shooting the water, and it's shot as such that the surface agitates. So if you want to keep a planted aquarium, horizontal is better, so therefore you're shooting water across the top of the aquarium and agitating the surface of the water. That tends to release less CO2 than your vertical. If you do choose to use vertical gas exchange, so air bubbles, and you've got a lot of plants in your aquarium, you're normally better off running your air stone at night time. So your plants are producing the oxygen during the day, and then the air stone is providing your oxygen at night time, so the fish don't run out of oxygen, while still allowing you to maintain carbon dioxide levels in the aquarium for the plants. Now let's talk about temperature and lighting within an aquarium, because there's different positions in your home that you can put the aquarium which will experience different conditions of temperature and lighting. So don't be afraid to experiment with the different types of tubes that are available on the market to put over your aquarium, because each circumstance is different and will portray different colours within your aquarium and your fish. There's all different types of aquarium tubes on the market. There's Biolux tubes, which really enhance the colour of the fish. There's high intensity full spectrum tubes, which really illuminate the whole aquarium. There's actinic tubes that give the blue effect. So it's worth looking at the different types of tubes available and experiment particularly on your aquarium and see which ones you like the look of and which ones bring up the colour of your fish. So not only do I want to encourage that you experiment with the amount of light you have in the aquarium, also taking into consideration any sunlight that it might receive, I also want you to be aware of the duration of the light for the aquarium. We're really after consistency, so if you experiment with how long your light's on, between 8 to 12 hours, if you find you're getting a fair bit of algae in the aquarium, it can be worth cutting the light down. If you find that your plants are just not growing well enough, usually we'll encourage that you increase the amount of light in the aquarium. But generally 10 to 12 hours is what you're looking for on a consistent basis for a planted aquarium. In general, you don't have a lot of plants in a cichlid tank, so therefore try to have the lights on mainly only when you're viewing it. So if there's no one home, you tend to have the lights in the aquarium off. It doesn't harm or worry the fish at all. Try to reduce the amount of direct light to the tank. So if there's a window that's beaming the light straight into the tank, try and make sure that the window's closed, particularly when you're not home. So if you do have plants in the aquarium, you probably want a minimum of 8 hours light, a maximum of 12 hours light. If there's no plants in the aquarium, we want to have the lights on mainly while you're viewing them. Now there's plenty of commercially available heaters which are quite effective. All you need to do is set the heater before you put it into the aquarium and have a thermometer to check that the thermostat in the heater is running correctly. You'll generally run your aquarium at around 25 degrees, but if you do want to promote breeding or grow the fish a little bit fast, get the temperature up to 27 or 28 degrees. So the temperature being too cold really shouldn't be an issue, providing that you have a good quality heater that's generously sized for the aquarium. Then your only concern is that the aquarium doesn't get too hot. Make sure that you don't position the aquarium in too hot or stuffier conditions. If the temperature of the aquarium does go above 30 degrees, you may even need to get a fan and blow it across the surface of the aquarium just to cool the water, because above 30 degrees can be fatal for some fish. Now that you've got the aquarium ready, you've got your filtration and your aeration running, you've got your temperature and your pH right, it's time for the fun bit, which is to get the fish. The fish will typically come from the aquarium in a bag like this one. Make sure that there's plenty of air for the amount of water in the bag, because they don't run out of water, but they do run out of air. If you're going to be travelling for more than a couple of hours, it's good to insist that they put some oxygen in with the air in the bag, and that'll give you up to a couple of days. Once you get your fish home, you're going to have to acclimatise them, which is to adjust the temperature in the bag to the temperature in the aquarium. So float the unopened bag in the top of the aquarium for about 15 minutes. If your aquarium is well established and you've got some very dominant fish in the aquarium which act very aggressively towards new introductions, it's a really good idea to totally rearrange your rocks. This will break up all the current territories in the aquarium, confuse and disorientate the fish that are currently in there, and they'll spend more time trying to find themselves a new territory that they want to rule, as opposed to targeting the new fish that have come into the aquarium and focusing on them and venting their aggression on them. This will disperse the aggression amongst all the other fish in the aquarium. Now that the bag's been floating for about 15 minutes, you open the bag up and roll it open. It's really important that you don't just fold the bag over the top of the aquarium. Many people lose fish doing this because the fish will be gasping and stressed at this stage and will be using a lot of oxygen, which won't be able to be replenished within the water because you've choked it off like that. The correct method is to roll the top of the bag open, trying to maximise the amount of surface area in the bag in which the gas can exchange. It's a good idea to test the water in the bag that your fish are coming from. If you're getting your fish from a reputable dealer, the pH should be fairly similar to that of your aquarium, because you should be keeping your aquarium at the same pH that your fish require, so that really shouldn't be a problem. On the other hand, if the fish have been in transport for a long period of time, the pH in the bag can actually fall. So if the pH of the bag is different to the pH of your aquarium, you need to adjust the pH of the bag slowly. So simply get a glass of water, pour it into the bag with the fish, and leave that for a further 5 minutes. Check the pH again. If it is then fairly similar, the fish can then be released into the aquarium. If it is still far off, repeat the process again until you get the pH roughly right. Particularly if you've got a new aquarium that doesn't have any fish in it, it's a good idea to make sure the first ones you put in are cheap and small, because they really are the test guinea pigs. And if anything's going to go wrong, it's likely to go wrong to them. When you put your first set of fish into the aquarium, it's a good idea not to feed your aquarium for 1 or 2 days after the fish have been introduced, because the aquarium doesn't have the adequate amounts of bacteria to break down the waste from the fish. It's a really good idea when you first get your fish to add some of the bacteria products which are available, because the bacteria has to be established in your aquarium to keep the fish alive. So the fish produce the waste, the bacteria breaks down the waste. If you put the fish in first and wait for the bacteria to grow, there is a toxic period while you're waiting for that bacteria to establish. Now, there are some very effective products on the market which will actually